This is the Army, Mr. Jones. No private rooms or telephones. You had your breakfast in bed before, but you won't have it there anymore. This is the Army.
As I'm going to start, this happened back in 1943. I was in high school. And during the time I was in high school, the war was in progress. Germany had invaded all these various countries with Hitler being in command. So during that time, known to us, we didn't really realize what was really happening because we were young, we were in school, but things far away in Germany, it took place, and the only time we remembered was when we got a letter from the government stating that you have to report. So in other words, we were drafted. At that time, we were very, very patriotic. I mean, anything that the government did was fine. We never felt, if Germany was going to come and invade us, and they kept telling us that Germany, if we let them go, they'll eventually invade our country, which they would have done eventually. They come to France, and they were going to go to England, and then they were going to go to America. So we felt we were doing our duty to go to the Army and do our bit. So in that time, the draft took place in December, which we didn't finish our high school. But due to the fact the government did some allowing us to graduate before our graduating date, they gave us this compensation and we were able to graduate early. So when we got the letter, we had 2 weeks to get our business in order, and we had to report to an induction center in Cleveland. So me with a train full of other inductees arrived in Cleveland. To get on a plane or a train, go to places, I found that very exciting. I mean, you might think, oh, a train, what's exciting about a train? But in those days, that was a big thing. Well, with growing up in a small town, I was very unaware of large crowds of people. The only time I had ever encountered large crowds of people was in a football game or a baseball game, but most of the time it was strictly this was the first time that I encountered this amount of people in one place. Anyhow, we got into one place and we were all pretty well told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, what to do it, and so forth and so on. So they herded us into a big auditorium and gave us all these instructions on what we were supposed to do. So they boarded us on a train and they shipped us. There was a large train. They shipped us down to South Carolina. This was the Camp Croft, South Carolina, that we started our basic training. Now this is when things started to happen. We were issued Army clothes, we were issued Army sleeping quarters, we were issued a bunk to stay in, and we had to go by the rules. And this is when they started training us in how to be a soldier, how to make our own beds, how to do our own laundry, how to do everything. And we lined up. This is another thing that upset me, something awful, is I had to line up and wait for food. Got up for breakfast, line up about 50 or 100 people, and we then got our breakfast, dinner, and lunch. But the first day, I'll remember very plainly, was we all got up in the morning and we went through the various lineups to get our proper equipment. First of all, they issued us our Army jackets, Army pants, Army boots, but they didn't give us any weapons at this time until we further on. Then we continue with our basic training. Our basic training took a lot of lecturing, a lot of instructions, and a lot of discipline. And with this, we also took in a lot of physical training. We had to start off with walking 5 miles the first day. Then the next day we'd run half of that distance, and then they would try and make us run the full 5 miles a day. So every morning we'd get up, we'd have to run 5 miles before breakfast. So in other words, they would blow the bugle in the morning, which you used to hear, and we'd get up out of our bed, put on our clothes, and we had to be out in within a matter of 3 or 4 minutes. If we weren't out, then we was hell to pay with the sergeant. But the sergeant was very strict. We had to be very disciplined. So we had to get up, go out there, and get our running over. And as soon as we got running over, we came back, had a shower, do whatever we had to do. Then we lined up for our first meal. And after the meal, we had to report. And the daily routine was 9 o'clock. We had to be in the lecture hall, and so forth and so on, until that 6-week basic training was up. And by that time we were well trained. So then after that we were saying, well, now what is next? Well, after the 6 weeks, they said, well, okay, we're going to send you down to advanced training. So they sent me down to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. That was Mississippi, yes. And that was approximately May of that month, 1944. So in that time, we did some training for the South Sea Islands. They were intending to send us down to the South Sea Islands. So with that in mind, they gave us all the lectures on the various diseases and insects and everything that happened in the South Sea Islands, which was very, very disturbing, because there's 2 or 3 sergeants or lieutenants that came in that had elephantitis disease, and their arms swelled up the size of a balloon, which was very, very distressing. I just didn't believe. But he said he'd get bitten by a small mosquito of some type. So, and then we went through this training, very rigid. And because we were born in Ohio, we were used to the North Country, and Mississippi is, as you know, is in the South. It took our toll. I mean, we lost a lot of weight, and we did a lot of perspiring, and it was a very tough training. And we had to run that 5 miles every morning as usual. And by the time you finished that 5 miles, you were sweating, and it was tough. But anyhow, we managed to get through that end of it. And there was various other episodes that we put in. But at that time, that's when I took my specialized training as a machine gunner. And I was assigned to a 30 caliber water-cooled machine gun. And I was the machine gunner first class, and then we had the second class, and then we had the ammo carriers behind us. So we were kind of a machine gun squad, and that's what we were trained as. So this 30 caliber machine gun was quite heavy. Now I would carry the machine gun part. The tripod was carried by the second gunner, and the rest of the ammo and the rest of it was carried by the various other people in the squad. So with this training, and we were out in the field and trained, and then I wondered why they had an air-cooled machine gun, because a machine gun, if it's used at a constant rate, would burn up the barrel almost immediately. You can't keep firing it. So in the training, the first thing you think of is, well, you get a machine gun and you grab the trigger and you... That's not the case. You never ever use a machine gun in that case in the Army. You fan it. You used to go fan it with your hand, and you shoot one round at a time. And unless there was a very extreme condition, you could use it as a constant weapon. So fanning a machine gun was the only way to use the machine gun. Otherwise, in battle, they said if you used it the other way, they would immediately know that there's a machine gun and they would zero in on it and they would knock you out immediately. So this is a sort of a camouflage type of weapon. Anyhow, getting back to Camp Shelby, we were all set to go and head for the South Sea Islands. And we were all getting excited about it and said, okay, you're shipping out. So, I mean, the thing is, when the Army, they didn't tell you too much. They didn't say you were going here, you're going there. We said, okay, you're going to go on a train, you're going to head for wherever. So we got on the train and we spent 4 days on the train. And unbeknown, we ended up in Indiana. And so what's going on? We really didn't know what's happening. So eventually they said, okay, you're not going to South Sea Islands, you're going over to Europe. So then we spent, I think, 2 glorious weeks in Indiana. It was a beautiful spot, and we had all the luxuries, the best food and the steaks and everything else. And then it's okay, now your time is up, you're ready to go. So we boarded another train and we ended up in Boston. And in Boston, we spent 2 or 3 days there in barracks, and we went to New York Harbor. And in New York Harbor, they loaded us on a ship. And that was quite exciting. In those days, I felt really happy to see all this, because this was the first time I was ever in New York City. And in the ship, we saw the Statue of Liberty. And oh, that was the biggest thrill of my life, to see the Statue of Liberty, you know, it was something. So then we all boarded the ship, and that was great. We were all on the ship, and we were all well fed and everything. And of course, we were briefed. So we get on the ship, and the first day was great. We had a nice voyage. And then came the 3rd day, the 4th day, and the 5th day. We ran into very violent weather. The storms, the North Atlantic was very rough, and the whole ship was seasick. It was the most miserable time. And we spent 2 weeks going overseas, and we landed. Everybody in that ship was seasick. There wasn't one soldier that wasn't. But, plus the throwing up in the volatile of the ship, I mean, it was just going up and down. And I remember in the porthole, you could see the horizon of the ocean. Next thing you know, you'd be looking into the water. Then you'd be seeing the horizon again. Then you wouldn't even see the horizon, just see the sky. And the ships would go like this. It was just rolling. And of course, later we found out that the North Atlantic is the roughest waters in the world. And of course, the ships that we had wasn't the largest ship. It was probably one of the smaller ships. This is the ship. Can you get that one? It was the Algonquin, believe it or not. After the 2 weeks was up, we landed in the Firth of Clyde, which is between Ireland and England, and we went up and landed in Scotland. And we got off the ship in Scotland, and we come down to camp down in northern England. So we spent 2 or 3 days in the camp, and of course at this time we didn't know what was happening until they sent us down to, after the training. And the other part about the interesting part about it is, in England was so far behind the times that I was just amazing. The roofs over there was made of thatched straw roofs. We were in England, we did a lot of touring. We went to see the Buckingham Palace and the London Bridge and all that. And this was exciting for me because I'd never seen that. But when we ended up in our barracks, they gave us a bag, and they said, okay, go over to the straw pile and fill it with straw, and that was your mattress. Everybody, the whole army, so we stepped on a straw mattress. That's a mattress filled with straw. But anyhow, we trained there as well. We run our 5 miles, and we used to see all the various, go through all the villages in northern England until we came to the time when it was right. Okay, now we're ready. Now D-Day was upon us. So they shipped us all on a train, and we went down to the city south of England. And this is where we boarded onto a barge. A huge barge, and there was, I'd say, maybe 400 or 500 soldiers on this big barge. And we had our weapons, we had our machine guns, we had our sidearm pistols, 9mm pistol as a sidearm, which machine gunners held. And we didn't have a rifle at that time. So they said, okay, now we're going to go over D-Day. So they loaded us up in the ship, and we were in this harbor in south of England. And I think we stayed there probably a day and a half to 2 days. And they said, okay, we're ready. Like we were standing in the ship, standing. There's nothing to eat, anything, no food or anything. We just said, okay, you guys are on your own now. So then we started across the English Channel. This is where we went across. It took probably about a day, a little less than a day to end up over there. But when we seen France, the land, it was very frightening because at that time they were bombing. They had ships that were throwing bombs over to kind of ease the landing approach. So as we got up to the shore, they dropped the thing and we started going ashore. And that wasn't quite as easy as it sounded, because I'd say probably about 10% of the fellows that I was with were killed right there. I mean, they were just, and they had machine guns aiming on all our ships, and they were just shooting them all, and that's just frightening. So then we immediately, as soon as that thing hit, we hit the water and we were on the shore, and it's, that was the major thing to happen. So the first night there, I mean, we were just laid on the shore, and we were, just waiting for anybody to come so we could shoot it. But we were spread out, and we were in a well-organized, advanced manner. But that was very tough because there was a lot of bombing going back and forth, a lot of explosions in different areas of the shore. But we were pretty lucky because we were in an area that wasn't hit too bad. So we moved ahead. And so with that, we kept moving ahead further and further into, like we'd get up, okay, now in the middle of the night, and the sergeant and all the people in command would say, okay, we're going to advance. So we'd all get up and we'd move forward in various sections, and until we got deeper into France. And finally, we got into a point where we were able to say, okay, now we're not under very heavy fire. It seems that the Germans have retreated so far back that they weren't going to bother us too much. So then we got up and we marched into a farmer's field, and we made a big camp there, and we pitched our little tents that we carried with us, the pup tents, and we slept in a pup tent for, I think we stayed there for 2 or 3 days. And I remember it rained and it was muddy, and I'll tell you another little story about it. We went to the farmer's barn, and we stole the hay. And so we got hay so we could put it down on the ground so we could sleep on the hay rather than sleep in the mud when we put our tent, because it was raining and it was muddy and everything. So the farmer, he got got a hold of the officers in charge, and the officer in charge said, okay, you guys all have to give up a package of cigarettes you were allotted that they gave us to the Red Cross, and we had to give it to the farmer for his hay. But that was the only incident that I can remember in those days. And then we marched into Paris, which was very, very exciting. The people there greeted us with open arms, and they threw flowers at us and gave us food, and we had a lot of good things to eat, and And of course, the biggest problem was, you remember, I think for 3 weeks, from the time we landed, 3 weeks from the time we got a place to stay, we had the same clothes on, the same shoes. We never took a shirt off. We never washed our face hardly or anything. We were just kind of huck, and we were in a terrible state of state. But as I say, we were still young. We were able to handle these situations. So when we got into Paris, we were still pretty tough going. We were able to get into a bivouac area where we were able to shower and change clothes, and we got fresh clothes and boots and everything of that nature. And then we started moving forward. And as we moved forward, they felt, okay, we were had enough for now. We're going to give fresh troops. So they brought more fresh troops in to relieve us. And this is where we sent us up. And this is very important. They sent us back into Belgium. So, and then we got into Belgium, and that was luxury. We were in log cabins, we had running water, we had food coming up, and oh, it was the greatest thing. And this was our rest period. And we were going to rest until things happened, and we were going to go back into action. So we were there for probably about 3 or 4, maybe 2 months, I'd say 2 months at the most. So they say, okay, fine, now you're in Belgium, we had a good rest, we were all getting fat, and we were getting bored, actually. And they brought movie stars come in, and then we had a little hall there and enjoyed it. And then that went good. And we had patrols, we'd go out, and they would check to make sure everything was all clear all around us, to make sure there's no invasions. But this one night, we heard a little bit of bombing, and we were hearing bombing all the time, so we didn't worry about it too much. And then all of a sudden, the sergeant came in, and he said, "We got to get out. We got to get out." And I said, "Why?" Well, he said, "I think we're gonna have to see some action." So we didn't know what the action was going to be. So then they said, "Okay, fine. We'll wait till after the meal trucks come in." There was no meal trucks. There was no other trucks come in. There was no other advance with it. We were cut off completely. So we said, well, there's no communication lines back and forth. They said that our communication lines were all cut. So in other words, we were surrounded. So this is when the Belgian Bulge took place. This was Germany, where General von Rundstedt took his last stand to try and do a winning victory over the Americans and the Allies. So what they did is they did a pincer movement on the left and the right, and they came up with their troops, with their tanks, and they just cut us right off. So we tried to retreat. So we retreated into a big wilderness, and we all got into this wilderness, and they said, okay, we'll start heading out toward the south. We tried to get out. As soon as we got out, 4 or 5 of the people got killed. So they got out. So okay. And then they tried to get out to the west. We got another 2 or 3 people got killed. So it was just a matter of, okay, we can't go anywhere. So we had to surrender. So the officers in charge said, okay, what we have to do is take our machine guns, take everything all apart, throw their firing pins in every direction so that they could get them and reuse them against us. So we threw all the parts and pieces and everything else, and then waved the white flag. Now that's when the Germans come in. They come in, and they had armor trucks come in on both sides. They surrounded us pretty well, and then the soldiers come in. And the first thing they did from us is they took anything that was valuable. They took my watch, my class ring, and they wanted like your dog. They didn't take the dog tags. They wanted any necklaces or anything of value. They took your wallet, took all the money out of your wallet, anything you might have. So that was fine. So they took all that and said, okay, now we got the forced march. This was the very tough area of the whole escapade. They marched us back into Germany by foot. And we marched for days and days. Now there's no food, no change of clothes, no nothing. And the thing is that with that situation, a lot of people, they started getting sick and dying. And this was in the middle of winter as well, because it was in December. So we were cold and freezing. A lot of people got frostbite and everything. But fortunately, I was happy that I was young enough that I could overcome all this problem. So we stayed in these various camps, and there's a lot of incidents that happened at all the camps. The German soldiers didn't treat us badly. The only problem with them is they didn't give us the food, and they didn't give us the shelter that we required. So they did eventually gave us a loaf of bread between 7 people. So you had to cut a piece, 7, and then they give you a bowl of soup, which they made from their garbage, and they would boil it and put cabbage in it, and they'd give it to us, and we'd have a cup of soup with that piece of bread. And that's all we get for one day. And the first part of the capture and the forced march was pretty bad. We had no living conditions there. They would put us down into a field and say, okay, stay there overnight, and they had guards. So rather than keep us marching all night and day, until we came to this first prison camp, which I call it. It was and they put us in a storage area where they kept the articles of selling things in like bins. They had big, huge bins in this area, and we used to sleep in these bins.
Oh, wow.
So, and I remember this one incident which I wasn't supposed to divulge this incident to anyone, because I was told by the CAA and the Army officials that this was strictly confidential. But anyhow, this little German officer come in. He says, "Okay, Roust, everybody get up," and he said he wanted everybody to get up and stay in front of him, and he was going to talk to us. And there was one fellow that was so sick he couldn't get out of the bin, and he said, "Out of the bin!" And then he got the soldiers to go up to poke him, and didn't poke him, so he pulled out his pistol and shot him. He fell out. So this was one of the atrocities of the war. So he took him. Then they took him away and buried him somewhere, I guess. But that was the worst episode of the camp that I encountered, other than the thing. So we slept in these bins. There was no facilities, no pillows. It was strictly a wooden board. That's about all. They kept us going, and they could see that we were all pretty well starving. At that time, I dropped a lot of weight. I started to go from 165 pounds, I went down to 100 pounds, and eventually, at the end of it all, I went down to 72 pounds. So I was really, really sick. But during that time, the only reason I survived when I did is because they said, "Okay, if you fellows want to go out and work for us, we will give you extra meals, extra food." So I said, "Okay, I'm fine. I'll go out and work." So I would go out, and what we did, they had us digging bodies up from the bomb buildings. So that was good. We would shovel the bodies, and what we learned, that if you dug up a body, which I dug up a lot of bodies, I mean, people are dead. Like you've got a version of dead people, but after a few days, another bed, it was just another corpse, it's just nothing to us. And of course, we've seen a lot of people get killed, so death wasn't a prime for me. But any body we dug up, the first thing we'd go was to their knapsack. All the people in Germany carried knapsacks, and in their knapsacks they carried black bread as their food source. So we'd go for the black bread, and we'd eat that bread. That's another way I survived. I eat that black bread. So a lot of the people in the camp, like they were dying, you know, by the dozens at times, but I was able to survive. So I kept doing this until the invasion was coming closer. We could hear the bombs, and in this particular camp we were in, they moved us further back into Germany. They kept moving us back. So this one day, after many bombs and things that were happening around us, they moved us into a train and they started going toward Germany. And every night they'd pull under a bridge to the day, and that's where they'd leave the train and the bridge. And then in the nighttime they'd travel. Being in the boxcar, that was fine. But you could look out the boxcar and they had a machine gun set up on one end of the train and machine gun set up on the other end of the train. So if anybody tried to get out of the boxcar, they'd just kill them. So they knew, I mean, they'd shoot you right away. I mean, it wasn't a matter of trying to escape. I mean, sure, you could open up the boxcar thing and jump out. As soon as you jumped out, they'd kill you. So this one time we were traveling in the nighttime and they stopped, and we said, well, heck, they didn't stop under a bridge this time. So we thought, that's strange. So we were in this boxcar with a bunch of thousands of other people, and we heard this bombing, and sure enough, the tanks that were coming up near the railroad tracks, and we wonder what's going on. And of course it was the Allied tanks. That was where we were liberated. So the actual invasion that took place is we were stuck in the boxcar. We looked out and we couldn't see any Germans there, and we could hear the tanks coming up. So we opened up the door very carefully, you know, and then the tanks come up next to us, and we start waving because we could see the Allied emblem on it, and they said, okay, they asked us if anybody needed any help, and they said there was a few people that needed help right away, so they come and they got them, and then they brought up trucks, and then we loaded it all up in a truck and took us back to a hospital in Verdun, France. Okay. And that's where we ended up. So that was the story of my camping days in the prison camp. Now, the various other things that happened in the camp were like communicating with the German people, and I think, which weren't too bad. It's like some of them were just as bad off as we were. And once I got liberated, they took us into the hospital. And I spent a lot of time in the hospital. They had blood transfusions, and I was down to 72 pounds. Then they shipped us down to a place in Le Havre, France, no, southern France, a city in southern France, which was a luxury town. And we stayed there for quite a few months, and they put us on a hospital ship, which is a Algonquin. And we got in this hospital ship, and they shipped us back to South Carolina. And we got there. That's where I was discharged from.
So how did your parents feel about you being drafted? How did your family feel? How did that go?
Well, I really didn't know, other than the fact that I think I can probably show you. A note that they did keep this is a note that said I was safe. So in other words, the War Department notified my parents that I was liberated, but eventually they also notified my parents I was missing in action. So when they sent this was a note in the paper that I was safe and I would be coming home soon. So they were happy. Well, it was, normally you don't get 2 Purple Hearts, but one was issued because of the prisoner of war camp, and one was issued because of wounds received in action. So that's pretty well the whole story, and from then on it was all uphill.